The valet at Tisson's Galleria had already opened my door before I realized my mother-in-law was holding a small velvet pouch in her lap, the kind you don't carry into a mall unless you're planning to fill it. She smiled at me the way she always did right before something expensive was about to happen. That tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said, "I thought we could just look. Sundays are always quieter." I should have said no right then. I should have stayed in the car. But I was 31 years old, 3 years into a marriage I still believed in, and I had spent most of those years learning that saying no to Vivian was a war I never won outright. So I climbed out of the passenger seat, smoothed down my coat, and followed her toward the entrance like I had 100 Sundays before. What I didn't know was that by the time we left that jewelry store an hour and a half later, my husband would be standing at the counter, screaming at me in front of the manager, 2 security guards, and a couple from Bethesda who were trying very politely to pretend they couldn't hear. My name is Rebecca, but everyone calls me Becca. I'm a 31-year-old data analyst at a healthcare consulting firm in McLean, Virginia, which is a polite way of saying I look at spreadsheets all day for people who can afford to pay someone else to look at spreadsheets. My father died when I was 26. Pancreatic cancer, fast, the kind that doesn't give you time to plan or grieve in any meaningful way before it's over. He left me his townhouse in Arlington, the one he bought in 1994 with my mother before she passed away when I was 9. The deed has only ever had one name on it after my dad's, and that name is mine, Rebecca Ann Caldwell. No cosigner. No spouse. Mine. I met my husband, his name is Thomas, at a friend's wedding in Annapolis the year after my father died. He was a wedding guest of the groom, I was a wedding guest of the bride, and we ended up sitting at the same table with 2 empty chairs because someone had RSVP'd and then ghosted. He was 33, an actuary at a big insurance firm downtown, soft-spoken in a way that felt safe to me at a time when I needed safe. He asked thoughtful questions. He didn't talk over me. When I cried in the parking lot at the end of the night because the bride and groom had done a father-daughter dance and I had forgotten that part was coming, he didn't say anything stupid. He just stood next to me and waited. We dated for 14 months. We got married at the Mayflower in D.C. Small ceremony, 60 people. My best friend gave the toast. I kept my last name because my father had given it to me and I wasn't going to give it up just because someone asked. Thomas understood. He always understood. That was the thing about Thomas. He understood everything until he didn't. His mother, Vivian, retired about 6 months before our wedding. She had been a senior administrator at a private school in Fairfax County for 28 years. 2-bedroom condo in Reston, paid off. A pension that gave her about $62,000 a year plus her Social Security, plus whatever she'd squirreled away in her 403(b). She was not poor. She was not even close to poor. She drove a 2019 Lexus RX that she bought used but well kept, took a cruise to Alaska the summer after she retired, and had her hair colored every 3 weeks at a place in Tyson's that charged $180 a session. I'm laying this out because it matters. Because for 2 years, I let the story be that Vivian was a sweet older widow on a fixed income, and I believed it the same way you believe a weather forecast, casually, without examining the source. In late September of last year, Vivian called Thomas to say her bathroom was being remodeled, and could she stay with us for a week or 2 while the contractors finished up. The condo would be unlivable, she said. Dust everywhere. Plumbing torn out. She didn't want to spend the money on a hotel. Thomas looked at me from across the kitchen island while he was on the phone, one hand over the receiver, and I said, "Sure, of course." She was his mother. She'd been a widow for 9 years. A week or 2 was nothing. She arrived on a Tuesday with 3 suitcases, a wheeled garment bag, and a La Croza Dutch oven she said she thought we might be able to use. I noticed the Dutch oven first because we already had one, my dad's, that I had carried home from Arlington in a cardboard box and used every Sunday for the chili he used to make. I'd put hers in the cabinet above the fridge where the appliance manuals lived, the one I never opened. The first week was fine. The second week was fine. By the third week, the contractors were still not finished, and I started to suspect there weren't any contractors at all. The fourth week, I came home from a long Tuesday at the office to find she had rearranged my pantry. It's a small thing, I know how it sounds, but she had taken every single item out of the pantry and put them back in a different order. The vinegars, which I keep on the second shelf because that's where I reach for them, were now on the top shelf behind the cereal. The cereal, which I never eat, was on the eye-level shelf. The cans of San Marzano tomatoes were arranged alphabetically with the rest of the canned goods, which meant they were now next to the artichoke hearts and not next to the dried pasta, where I needed them when I was cooking. I stood there for a long time looking at the pantry. Vivian was on the couch in the living room, watching one of those British baking shows, and she could see me from where she sat. She didn't turn around. She just said, over her shoulder, "I hope you don't mind, sweetheart." It was driving me a little crazy. Now everything's where it should be. I closed the pantry door. I went upstairs. I changed into sweatpants. I came back down and started dinner without saying anything because Thomas was on the phone with a colleague in his office, and I didn't want to fight at 7:30 on a Tuesday. But something shifted in me that night. I don't know how else to describe it. It was a small click. The way a key feels when it finally lines up with the pins in a lock you've been jiggling for too long. I started watching her after that. Not in a paranoid way, just paying attention. She did my laundry without asking. She moved my throw pillows. She took down a small framed photograph of my father from the bookshelf in the den, the one of him at his retirement dinner from the federal job he'd had for 31 years, and put it in a drawer, and when I asked her where it was, she said, "Oh, honey, it was getting so dusty. I just wanted to give it a wipe down." But the drawer it was in didn't have any glass cleaner, or any rag, or any sign that any cleaning had taken place. It was just in the drawer. The Sunday she suggested the jewelry store was 8 weeks into her stay. She'd been hinting for 2 weeks that her birthday was coming up. 65th birthday. A milestone, she said. She and Thomas's late father, Robert, had always celebrated milestones in big ways, she said. When Robert turned 60, they'd flown to Italy. When she'd turned 60, Robert had bought her a tennis bracelet from Mayors that she still wore on special occasions, she said. I knew where this was going. I think I knew it before she did, but I let it happen because part of me wanted to see how far she would actually push. That Sunday, Thomas had a work thing, some quarterly review prep he had to do from home. Vivian asked me if I wanted to go to the mall, just to walk around, get out of the house. She said it like a friend asking a friend. I said sure. We parked at Tyson's Galleria, which is the fancier of the 2 Tyson's malls, the one with Hermes and Chanel and a Tesla store. We walked past a Brunello Cucinelli display in a window, and she stopped and said, "Oh, look at that cashmere coat. Robert would have loved that on me." I said, "It's beautiful." We kept walking. She led us to a jewelry store I'd never been in before. Not Tiffany, not Cartier, something with one name on the door, something Italian-sounding, the kind of place where you have to ring a buzzer to be let in. A woman in a black dress greeted Vivian by name. Vivian by name, like she'd been there before. "So lovely to see you again, Mrs. Whitaker," the woman said. "Is this the daughter-in-law?" I smiled. I said yes. The woman shook my hand. Her name was Caterina. She had a slight Italian accent and rings on 3 fingers that I priced in my head at maybe $40,000 total. Vivian had me sit at a little marble table with a velvet runner across the top. Caterina brought out a tray of rings. Not for me. For Vivian. Vivian started trying them on, holding her hand out to the light, asking my opinion. I gave my opinion because what else was I going to do? "A sapphire one looked nice," I said. "The yellow gold band looked nice," I said. Then Caterina brought out a second tray. This one had a single ring on it, pear-shaped diamond, 3.5 carats, platinum band with small diamonds running halfway down each side. The kind of ring you don't price in your head because you already know it's the kind of number where the zeros stop meaning anything. Vivian put it on. She held her hand out. Her eyes filled with tears. Robert would have wanted me to have this, she said. He always promised me a real diamond. We just never had the right time. Katerina nodded with the practiced sympathy of someone who had heard this exact line from dozens of other women in this exact chair. How much is it? I asked, because I had to. 12,800, Katerina said. $12,800. I sat there for a second. Vivian was looking at her hand. She wasn't looking at me. I waited for her to say, but it's just too much. Or, maybe for my 70th. Or anything that a reasonable person who'd come to a store to look would say. She didn't. Instead, she said, Becca, sweetheart, would you mind? I left my purse in the car. I'll write you a check when we get home, of course, but I just don't want to make Katerina hold this for me. She's been so kind. I felt the click again. The lock turning. I said, very calmly, Vivian, that's a lot of money. Maybe we should call Thomas. She turned her head slowly toward me, and her face did something I had not seen her face do before. It was not angry. That would have been easier. It was something closer to disappointed. Disappointed in a child who had not understood the rules of a game everyone else was playing. Sweetheart, she said, I don't think we need to bother Thomas with something this small. Something this small. I told her I needed to step outside and make a call. Katerina nodded politely. Vivian's mouth tightened. I walked out of the store into the bright echo of the mall, past a fountain, past a kiosk selling cell phone cases, and I called Thomas. I told him where we were. I told him about the ring. I told him about the ring. I told him the price. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Thomas said, Just put it on the card, Becca. We can talk about it when you get home. I stood very still. Thomas, I said, it's almost $13,000 for your mother. Not for us. It's her 65th birthday. She's been through a lot. Just put it on the card. Are you going to pay me back? Is she? Another pause. Becca, don't be weird about this. It's family. I told him I'd call him back. I went back inside. Vivian had the ring on her finger and was discussing engraving with Katerina. The inside of the band, she was saying. The date. Maybe a small infinity symbol. I sat down at the marble table. Katerina smiled at me. Vivian did not look at me. I said, Katerina, I'm so sorry. We need to step out for a moment to make a decision. Would you mind holding the ring for an hour or so? Katerina, professional to her bones, said of course. Vivian took the ring off slowly and laid it on the velvet like she was setting down a baby. We walked to the car in silence. Vivian got in the passenger seat. I drove home. The whole drive, 22 minutes, neither of us said a word. I could hear her breathing through her nose. Sharp little breaths. When we walked in, Thomas was standing in the kitchen in his Sunday clothes, sweatpants and an old college sweatshirt, and the second he saw my face, he knew. He looked at his mother. She was already crying. She had not been crying in the car. She was crying now, on cue, the moment the audience walked into the room. She wouldn't buy it for me, Vivian said. Tom, I asked for one thing for my birthday, and she made me feel like I was begging her on the sidewalk. That's not true, I said. Thomas looked at me. His face did the thing I had seen exactly 4 times before in our marriage, where his eyes went somewhere else and the man I loved was replaced by a son who, somewhere around 8 years old, had learned that the way to make his mother stop crying was to fix whatever the problem was, quickly, without asking too many questions. Becca, he said, are you serious right now? She's 65. It's her birthday. It's not even your money. It's our money. What is wrong with you? I felt the temperature of my own blood change. I am not someone who yells. I'm not someone who throws things. My mother died when I was 9, and I learned very young that the loudest person in the room is almost never the person who's actually right. I said, Thomas, sit down. He didn't sit down. I said it again. Sit down, please. He sat down. Vivian was still crying at the counter. I said, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. Did you know that your mother was going to ask me to buy her a $13,000 ring today? He didn't answer. I said, I'll take that as a yes. It's her 65th, he said again, weaker this time. It's her 65th, and she has $62,000 a year in pension, and a paid-off condo and a 403b that I happen to know is sitting at about $400,000 because she mentioned it at Easter last year. Why am I buying her a ring, Thomas? He didn't answer. And why, I said, is Katerina at the store calling her by name like she's been there before? His face changed again. Different change this time. What do you mean? He said. I told him what I meant. I told him about the woman at the door. I told him about the way the second tray had come out without anyone asking for it. I told him about the velvet table and the way the whole thing had felt rehearsed because it had been rehearsed, because Vivian had been there before, probably multiple times, probably picking out exactly which ring she was going to make me pay for. Vivian's crying stopped abruptly. She got very quiet at the counter. I turned to her. I said, Vivian, how many times have you been to that store? She said, I don't know what you mean. I said, yes, you do. She said, I've been once or twice. Just browsing. I said, Katerina knew your name. She said, Becca, I don't appreciate this tone. I said, I don't appreciate being walked into a setup. Thomas put his face in his hands. That night, after Vivian had gone upstairs with her dinner on a tray because she said she was too upset to eat with us, I sat at the kitchen table across from my husband, and we had the first real conversation we had ever had in our marriage, by which I mean the first conversation where I was not interested in making him feel better. I told him I needed to know what else there was. I had a feeling, I said, the same feeling that had been clicking in me for weeks. I told him about the pantry, about the photograph of my father in the drawer, about the Dutch oven, about all of it. He said I was overreacting. He said his mother was a lot, he knew that, but she meant well. I asked him if he knew that Vivian had been to that jewelry store before. He said no. I asked him if she had asked him for money lately. He looked at the table. I said, Thomas, how much? He said, it's not what you think. I said, how much? He said, she's borrowed a little, here and there, to help with some bills. I said, she has a paid-off condo and a pension and $400,000 in retirement. What bills? He didn't answer. I went upstairs. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of our bed in the dark for about an hour, and then I went into the small office where I keep my files, and I pulled out the manila folder with the deed to my townhouse. The townhouse my father left me. The one that has been rented out for 3 years now because Thomas and I bought our place in McLean together with his salary as the down payment and my Arlington property as collateral on the bridge loan. The deed had my name on it, only my name. I had never added Thomas. He had never asked me to. I had assumed this was because he was a reasonable man who understood that inheritance from my dead father was not joint marital property. I opened my email. I scrolled back through 6 months of messages. I found one I had ignored at the time. From an estate attorney in Tysons, a man named Howard Belkin. He had emailed me to confirm an appointment I had never made regarding a property transfer he had never been authorized to discuss. The email was from August. I had assumed it was a scam and deleted it from my inbox, but I had not deleted it from my inbox, but I had not deleted it from my trash. I opened the email. I read it again. The address on the property was my Arlington townhouse. I sat there for a long time. The next morning, I called Howard Belkin's office at 9101 a.m. I told the receptionist I needed to know who had inquired about a property transfer regarding my Arlington address. I gave my full name and the property address. The receptionist put me on hold. A man got on the phone. He said, Mrs. Caldwell, I'm so glad you finally called. I've been trying to confirm this with you for months. I said, Mr. Belkin, I have never spoken to you before. I have never authorized anything. He was quiet for a moment. He said, could I ask you to come in this afternoon? I went in at 2. He sat me down in his office. He laid out a folder of documents. He showed me a series of emails from someone using my name, my address, an email account that was almost identical to mine, but with one letter different, asking him to begin the process of adding a second name to the deed of my Arlington property. The second name was Thomas's. The emails were not from me. I asked him who had paid the retainer. He pulled up his records. The retainer had been paid by a personal check. The check had been written from a checking account at Burke and Herbert Bank. The name on the check was Vivian Whitaker. I think this is the moment in my life I will remember most clearly when I am old. Not the day my father died. Not the day I got married. The moment I sat in Howard Belkin's office and saw my mother-in-law's signature on a check written to a lawyer who was being told, in my name, to put my husband's name on the only thing in the world I had left from my father. Howard Belkin told me, very kindly, that he had not proceeded because he had not been able to get a verifiable signature from me. He had been suspicious from the start. He apologized for not contacting me sooner. He had been told by the person posing as me that I was traveling. I thanked him. I asked for copies of everything. He gave them to me. I drove home. I stopped at my own bank on the way and put copies in my safe deposit box. I drove the rest of the way home with the original folder on the passenger seat. Thomas was in the kitchen. Vivian was in the living room watching her show. I asked Thomas to come into the den. I opened the folder on the desk. I did not say anything. I let him read. He read. He read it twice. He said, "Becca." I said, "How long?" He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I didn't know." I said, "How long, Thomas?" He said, "I didn't know about the lawyer." I swear to God I didn't know. She mentioned that we should think about putting my name on the Arlington property. For protection, she said, in case anything happened to you. I told her no. Becca. I swear. I said, "And then what?" He said, "And then I assumed she let it go." I said, "She didn't let it go." He said, I see that. She forged my email. She paid a lawyer. In her own name? With her own check. Why would she do that with her own check, Thomas? Why would she be that stupid?" He didn't answer. I said, "I'll tell you why. Because she didn't think I would ever look. Because for 2 years I have been the woman who does not look. I rearranged the pantry back. I put my father's photograph back on the shelf. I drive home from the mall without saying anything. She thought I would just keep not looking. He was crying. Thomas does not cry. He was crying. I said, "I want her out of this house tonight. I want her out by 9 p.m. I'll help her pack." He nodded. I said, "And Thomas, I want you to understand something. I am not deciding tonight whether we are still married. I'm deciding tonight whether she ever sets foot in this house again. The answer to that is no. The answer to the other question, I will tell you in 6 months." He said, "6 months?" I said, "6 months? You're moving out for 6 months, to an apartment, not to her condo. An apartment, you will go to therapy. So will I, separately. At month 4, we will start couples counseling. At month 6, we will decide. Until then, you do not get a vote in my house. You do not get a vote in my finances, and you do not get to ask me to be reasonable about your mother. Are we clear?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Repeat it back to me." He repeated it back to me. I went upstairs. I told Vivian to pack. She started to cry. I told her crying was not on the table. I told her if she wanted to discuss the matter further, we could have the conversation in front of Howard Belkin and the Fairfax County Police, who I had spent the morning consulting with on a non-emergency basis. She stopped crying. She packed in 45 minutes. Thomas drove her to her condo. The bathroom, of course, was completely fine. There had never been any contractors. There had never been any remodel. The condo was spotless, exactly the way she always kept it. Thomas was gone for 6 months. He went to therapy. I went to therapy. We started couples counseling on the day he hit the 4-month mark, which he tracked on a calendar he showed me without my asking. He cut off financial contact with his mother completely. He sent her a letter, certified, written with his therapist, explaining that any future contact would have to go through written communication only, and that he would not be discussing me, my property, or my family ever again. He showed me the letter before he sent it. At month 6, I made him a pot of my father's chili. We ate it at the kitchen table. He moved back in on a Saturday. He brought his suitcases up the stairs alone. He didn't ask me to make space for anything. He fit himself around the life I had built without him for half a year. And slowly, we started rebuilding. The Arlington townhouse is still in my name. Only my name. It always will be. Vivian sent a card on my last birthday. I did not open it. Thomas put it in the recycling without asking me, and I did not stop him. People ask me sometimes if I forgave her. The honest answer is that I never had to. Forgiveness is a thing you give to someone who asks for it. She has not asked. I suspect she never will. She still believes, somewhere in the back of her mind, that she was protecting her son from a woman who would not have done right by him. I let her believe that. It costs me nothing. What I have, instead of forgiveness, is the deed to my father's house, in a safe deposit box at a bank she will never enter, with my name on it. Only my name. The way my father wanted it. The way I want it. The way I want it. The way it will stay. And every Sunday, in the kitchen of the home I share with the husband I am still, after everything, choosing, I take down my father's Dutch oven from the second shelf where I keep it, and I make the chili. Just the way he taught me. The vinegars are on the second shelf where they belong. The cereal is in the cabinet over the microwave. No one has rearranged my pantry in 14 months. That is what I have. And it is, finally, enough. I think the hardest thing for me to accept, even now, is that none of what happened was an accident. Not the pantry, not the photograph of my father in the drawer, not the rehearsed scene at the jewelry counter with Katerina, who already knew Vivian's name. Every small thing was a test, and for almost 2 years I had been passing those tests by saying nothing, by being agreeable, by being the kind of daughter-in-law who lets things slide because she wants the peace more than she wants the truth. And every test I passed gave her permission to try a bigger one. That is the part I had to sit with in therapy week after week. Not what she did. What I had taught her she could do. I used to think being a good person meant being a soft person. My father was a soft man in his own way, gentle, slow to anger, and I confused his softness with the idea that good people don't push back. But my father also kept his name on his own deed, and he taught me to keep mine on mine. And when I look back now, I understand that he was not soft about the things that mattered. He was soft about the things you can afford to be soft about. He was iron about the rest. What I learned from Vivian, from Thomas, from the manila folder on Howard Belkin's desk, is that being a kind person and being a careful person are not opposites. They are the same thing, done in the right order. Kind first, in how you treat people. Careful second, in what you sign, what you share, what you give away, what you let slide. The two have to live in the same house, or one of them eats the other. I also learned that the strongest thing I did in that whole story was not getting Vivian out by 9 p.m. It was the 6 months I made Thomas live in an apartment. Anyone can throw someone out in a moment of anger. It takes something else, something steadier to say to the person you love, I am not closing the door, but I am also not opening it back up until you have done the work. That waiting was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was also the most honest thing I have ever done. So, if you are sitting somewhere right now, rearranging your own pantry back for the 3rd time, putting your father's photograph back on the shelf, smiling at the dinner you didn't want to cook for the guest who wasn't supposed to stay this long, I want you to hear this from someone who has been there. The click in your chest, the small lock turning, that is not paranoia. That is your life trying to get your attention. Listen to it. Then keep your name on your own deed, your own accounts, your own choices. Be kind. Be very careful. And do not let anyone, not even the people you love, teach you that those two things cannot coexist. They can, they must, they are the whole point.